Good afternoon, and welcome back to Jeff and the Rabbi. I was just thinking about the good old days of anti-Semitism. I remember when I was a kid, my closest friends had to mask their disdain from the chosen people in Jew jokes and cloak comments about cheapness and voluminous schnozzes. I kind of felt sorry for the average Yid provoker back then, but things are so much easier for the Hebrew haters of today. So we all know about the media's bias against the Jewish state. They don't even try to hide their outright animus toward Israel anymore. I've always had a hard time with this. Why would the AP, CNN, and most of the news agencies in the Western world all have such an unfair tilt against the Jewish nation? You would think that the media elite would honor and praise the miraculous story of a people who rose from the ashes of a Holocaust that destroyed half of their entire population to build one of the most successful nations in the world in the span of about 70 years. But for some reason, that narrative doesn't work when you're talking about the Jews. I cannot fathom why there is such hate for the amazing country of Israel, even in the liberal-minded United States. But I think I finally figured it out. Anti-Israel is just cloak cover for anti-Semitism. Duh. Wow. With anti-Jewishness now supported from the very top of the American left, disguised as anti-Israel, it makes all negative reactions to the Jewish state legitimate. And it is working magnificently. Now everyone can get into the game and not have to worry about being labeled a hater. It is a brilliant progressive plan. The media can now be openly anti-Semitic and still call themselves respectable, enlightened, tolerant, open-minded liberals. It's a win-win situation. Just boycott and hate Israel. We don't hate the Jews. We just hate the Jew country. The most amazing thing about these new developments is watching the secular liberal Jews and the media play a game of Hebrew Twister by bending themselves into pretzel-like positions and boycotting themselves. That's kind of awkward, but it's actually an impressive trick. Yes, the simple days of just making sure that the kikes were kept out of the country club are long gone. America has moved into the digital age of afflicting the children of Abraham. Let's face it, Jews are never going to be treated like any other religion. We will always be thought of as different. Now, our rabbi here thinks that's awesome. He likes the fact that the world can't come to terms with the Jews. Now, of course, the rabbi was never checked for horns by the father of his date to the junior prom, or questioned when his dad was going to pick him up from practice in the big Jew canoe. But I am willing to give him the benefit of the doubt due to his closeness to the Almighty.
Ooh.
So, Rabbi, I'm putting a big one on you there.
Yeah, I'm all for it. I'm all for it. I'm loving it. I read the news, and I recently read one of my favorites. My favorites was, I just reprinted an article from an AP press reporter in Jerusalem, based in Jerusalem. He's a Jewish guy, born and raised in Canada, moved to Israel, and he's been was working for the AP, and he wrote this article, I think, in 2014-ish, something like that. There was a lot. Gaza was inflamed at the time, and he, was writing about this. And he said, listen, I just got a bit honest. And he said, I'm not trying to smash the AP, because they're really all the same, whether it be AP, Reuters, whoever it is. So there clearly is a double standard when it comes to Israel. And he gave a bunch of facts and figures, some of them which I thought were fascinating, none of them surprising, but interesting nonetheless. Like, for example, there are 40, AP has 40 reporters, or had at the time of this article, 40 reporters covering the Israel-Palestinian conflict, which, by the way, he says is how they choose to understand the conflict. They, of course, the ones that named it that.
Right.
They've decided that that's the issue, which means that if somehow Israel and the Palestinians could work it out, then everyone would be happy and the whole Middle East would be. That's all their decision. But besides that, they have 40. They don't have that many reporters in Russia. They don't have that many reporters in China. They don't have that many reporters in the entire continent of Africa.
Wow.
But they have 40 reporters. Before the whole Syrian civil war broke out, they had one stringer in Syria who was government approved, and he basically was just there to just pass on government
Information,
releases
right.
into that. Right. So one in Syria, and then the war broke out there. But they had 40 in Israel. Well, anyway, he pointed out that if you think about it, in 2014, 42 people were killed. There were 42 people killed in the conflict in Israel with the Palestinians and the Israelis. That's about the number of people that are killed every month in Chicago.
Good point. Very good point.
Right.
Yes.
I don't recall reading a story about like the homicide or the war that's going on in Chicago.
And you won't be reading anything about
But
that.
what
right?
about the war? The
Yeah.
war in Chicago, they have to cover it. I mean, it's, who are the two sides? Who are the combatants? What do they
Right.
want? Not too much coverage and all that. So how do you... Now, of course, he went on to describe a whole bunch of other areas in the world where there were huge conflicts where thousands of people are being slaughtered on an annual basis, and yet they don't cover those stories
Right.
at all. Then he said that he did an analysis of stories coming out of Israel discussing Israeli corruption. Israeli corruption. He said in one period of time, in a 2-week period of time, the AP released 27 stories on Israeli corruption. Whether that be corruption in the military or domestic corruption or infighting between like various segments of
So
society.
not even one thing. These are multiple stories of corruption.
Anything, right?
Multiple.
Anything that was a story of corruption.
Right.
It could have been like Netanyahu's wife,
Right,
or
right.
the mayor of Jerusalem, or one group is being prejudiced against the women or children or who knows
Right,
what.
Right.
They just anything that is Israeli corruption they cover. No stories about any corruption. 0 stories about any corruption from the Palestinian side, Hamas.
I mean, considering that the
Obviously-
entire government is corrupt.
Obviously,
over
they're just paragons of virtue. They couldn't
Right.
find anything to cover.
Right.
So he
Right.
said he brought up a story about corruption. They said, no, we don't cover that.
Wow.
We don't cover that.
It's amazing.
But he also said that they have a rule. This is a rule. Whenever they issue a story and the information has been censored by the Israeli military, they always put in the story, this story was censored by the military. However, if the story was censored by Hamas, for example, they don't put that in the article.
Right.
Now, of course, how does Hamas censor a story?
Well, they could kill you, but that's a different way.
Basically, they say, if you publish this, we'll kill you.
Right. I guess. But that's
Right,
probably how that works.
They don't write that.
No.
They don't call that censorship.
Under
So-
fear of death, we are not.
Right. If this report is released, then next time that reporter shows up, we're going to kill him.
Right.
They don't put that in. So anyway, he goes on and on and on and on and on with all kinds of facts and figures, and shows how there's this huge double standard. So he says they're missing the boat. They think that it's really all about the tension between Israel and its neighbors, and it's really not even about that. It's really all about Israel, and it's all about the Jews. And they're obsessed with the Jews. And according to him, they're of course missing the boat because it's really broader issues and Arab radicalism or whatever it is that he thinks it is. Now, I agree with all of his facts.
Right.
They are facts. You got to agree with facts.
Well, I don't know if you really have to
really,
agree with facts anymore, but
that was
okay.
kind of an out there statement. Yeah, okay.
You might get in trouble for even saying that.
Right.
Our censors, but
Right.
yes.
But yeah, let's say it's accepted. It's an accepted truth, whether observed or abided by or not, that you're supposed to agree with facts.
We'll take that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I don't accept his conclusions. I like the double standard. I'm loving the double standard.
Yes, I tell you, he doesn't drink in the mornings. That's all I'm going to say.
Right.
So let's see how this is going to
I
come out.
love the double standard. I love the fact that they publish all these stories about Israel corruption.
Wow.
And the fact that they don't publish any stories about Palestinian corruption. You know why? Because what they're saying is Palestinian corruption, well, what? That's not newsworthy. You know what I mean?
Maybe.
It's not newsworthy, which means
Maybe.
like no one thinks that there isn't any. Even everywhere, there's some corruption everywhere. But they're saying it's not newsworthy, meaning what do you expect? Of course there's corruption. Now, Jews for some reason, we expected there should be no corruption. And I say, yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah, I expected there should be no corruption. Why? The underlying premise of Israel is that this state was, as we just read in the Torah, the Jews who read the weekly Torah portion will have just read that God promised the land to Abraham and to his children after him forever. God promised to Abraham and to his children after him forever.
I don't know if the people on the left of our government got that memo.
Oh, but they did. I say they did.
You think they did get the memo?
I think the AP got the memo. They don't want to acknowledge it, but they got the memo.
Right.
And they are in essence saying, you are claiming to be Abraham's children. You're claiming you have some right, some divine given right. You're claiming you're like agents of God or something. Well, you better be acting like that.
Wow.
And I agree. I agree with them. I think they're right.
Now, I think maybe you're giving them a lot more credit than they deserve, but this is great, though. I like where you're going here. I do.
They don't really get it, but they sense it.
But they sense, they feel
I
it.
think they sense it. They all know. Again, getting back to Abraham, it said, those that bless you will be blessed, and those that curse you will be cursed. So they're saying, listen, you guys are supposed to be the nation that whoever blesses you is blessed. Like all the blessing comes from you. Whoever curses you is cursed. You got to act like that. You claim to be something above and beyond. Now, let's say you don't claim to be something above and beyond. Let's say your claim is, well, we used to live there first, and therefore we have a right to this because we were there like already 3,000 years ago or 2,000 years ago, and we deserve it back.
Yeah, that's a tough argument.
That's an argument to make, but I think that's about as likely as the Cherokees reclaiming Georgia.
Oh, we just said we were not going to talk about Elizabeth Warren in this
right,
show.
right.
We said it's not going to be political.
Right.
So we're not supposed to talk about that.
Right. Okay.
Sorry. Sorry to our viewers. I apologize for that.
By the way, just as an aside,
note.
but we're going to give this a full session next week.
Oh, good.
Elizabeth Warren again, because the Indian tribes are very upset with her because they said, you can't just say that because you got some Indian blood in you that you're Indian. You have to be accepted into the tribe, and we get to decide who is accepted into the tribe.
That's a little bit.
I thought that was a pretty neat idea.
That is a good.
Can you imagine that the tribe gets to decide who gets come in?
Wow, write that down. Maybe we can use that. I don't know.
Yeah,
if that works.
we'll do a whole show on that one.
Oh, good. That's exciting.
Yeah. But it's not going to happen. They're not giving back Manhattan. Right?
Not going to happen, right.
There is a tribe that actually sued the United States government for the state of Connecticut. They want back the
They
state
can
of
have Connecticut.
Right.
I'm not doing anything with it.
You know, what they got was some casinos.
Okay.
But, it's just not going to happen.
It's worth more than Connecticut, actually.
So if the Jews think that they're going to show up after having been scattered around the world for a couple thousand years, they're going to show up and reclaim Israel because we don't have any other land and you treated us so poorly in all the other lands and it was ours originally and all those type of claims.
That doesn't hold water.
It's just not going to go. I mean, it might, on paper, it makes tremendous sense, but practically it's not going to happen because there's other people there and they say no thanks. But if they come along and they say, it says in the book that this is our land,
and the book that you
and
read.
it was promised. I read the book all the time,
but not just you. Christians, Muslims, everybody reads the same book.
And it was promised. However, they'll say, okay, well then, if we're going to play by the book, it also says in the book, God says, and you shall do, this is in Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 14, just so happens, or somewhere around there, 16, something like that.
I'll give you that.
It says, and you shall do that which is straight and good in the eyes of God, in order that you will inherit the land. And then he goes on to say, and I will dismiss all of its inhabitants from before you. Which sounds like, if you really do what you're supposed to, God's just going to take care of it. So the fact that you're having all these Gaza protests and all this people getting hurt and all this strife and argument, it sounds to me like maybe you haven't done what God says. And you're trying to claim what you have promised from God, but you're not following your own rules. That's corruption.
Wow.
We don't like it. The world says, if you want to claim and you want to set your rules, play by your rules.
Now, I like what you're saying, but are you saying, though, let me just add to it, that, like say that the woman running for Congress in New York, Cortez, and when she talks about the Jews and even Beto O'Rourke, who met with, the Arabs, that's what they're thinking? You think they're gone that deep into their thinking? You're giving them such credit for their intellectual and theological honesty that that's what they're saying?
No.
Okay.
No.
I got worried there for a second.
I think that something down deep
You think something
is nagging them, and what it really just irks them. It irks them. I bet you if you scratch them deep enough, they also do believe in things like the elders of Zion. Where the elders of Zion thing come from?
That's true.
Because down deep, everyone believes that really it
That's
is
there.
all about the Jews.
Yeah, well, I
down
agree with
deep,
you there.
they actually think that it is all about the Jews. And that's why they're really upset. Otherwise, why, if this is just a conflict,
Well, that's a good
then
point.
why so much coverage?
Right, we had Angola. There was a conflict there years ago. There's a conflict in Sudan. There's a conflict in Rwanda.
Now, and you'll say, well, anti-Semitism. And I'll ask you the same thing. Why anti-Semitism?
Why not anti-Rwandaism?
It's so
That's true.
illogical. That the leftists hate the Jews because they're capitalists, and right-wingers hate the Jews because they're communists, and on and on and on.
Right,
Every
right.
permutation you can
point.
possibly figure.
Very good point.
Why? It makes no sense. It makes no sense because the truth is the Jews really don't make any sense. So for the Jews, the only way out of it is to accept the fact that, you know what? We really don't make any sense. And if we're going to go for this land, the only way we can really go for it is based on like these biblical promises, which, by the way, any Jew should have figured out, because who's going to come back after 2,000 years? The Indian tribes, this is only 200 years later, and they still are not getting the land. In 2,000 years, 1,800 more years, do you think that they're going to have a better claim to the land? And they probably won't even be around. I don't know, and not identifiably. But the Jews are still around. They have to realize they are a miracle. And as a miracle, they're going to lay claim to the land as the heirs of a promised miracle. Well, if you want to live like that, and you want to make that claim, you better live up to the standards of that. If you don't want to live like that, I think you're going to find over and over and over again the rest of the world is just not going to buy it.
Interesting. So because it's not just in the state of Israel where we have these issues, obviously in France and in everywhere else and around, and in Sweden and around the world. So you think mainly the issues are because Jews have to live up to a higher standard, and
Right.
deep inside everyone, they're expecting that higher standard from Jews.
That's right.
It's a
So
lot of pressure.
it sure is. So when they say there's a double standard, so I love it. Yes.
Good, okay.
Thank you. And we, Jews, should listen to the rest of the world who's holding us to a higher standard and say, oh, they get it. Maybe we have to get it.
So you're saying, I get it, we'd be in the country club. They would let us into the country club if we just lived to a higher standard. Now, when I grew up, I guess that's true, because they didn't let us into the country club where I lived, and it was just like a mile away from our house, and we had to drive like 30 miles to the other thing until the country club went bankrupt. Then they let all the Jews in, because that's what they thought living up to a higher standard is because they paid the bills and they came and went to the country club. So is that different? Is that something?
I think that there's a little bit of a gap there.
Okay, but that's at least I do remember that. So
Yeah.
I thought that meant something.
So that's really my
Interesting.
bottom line. My bottom line is they say that there's a double standard. I say, you're right. If they want to impose a double standard, maybe we should say, great, you're imposing a double standard. What does that say about those people who you impose a double standard? That means you hold them, as opposed to other people, to a higher standard. And I get it, because that's what the book said. There's a lot of promises God gave to the Jewish people, but he does hold them to a higher standard. So the world and God are getting it. Now the Jews just got to get it.
So once the Jews get it and we live to that higher standard, we're not going to have the problems with
God will dismiss all of them. No inflaming balloons, incendiary balloons, and no more innocent people being killed in Gaza, and no more terrorist explosions and all that. God will just take care of it.
Wow. So it's up to us. It's always up to us.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. So we live right, The
Here
world
we are
lives
again.
right and everything works out
Here
perfectly.
we are again. Yeah, came
lot
back
of-
to that same place every time.
A lot of pressure, Jews. You guys better get on this. This is tough.
Yeah.
All right, I like that. So we're talking about Elizabeth Warren next week?
Yeah, let's
Oh,
do it.
I'm actually excited. I got some fun stuff I can say about that. All right, great. This is exciting. We'll see you next week.